it's a pleasure. Thanks a lot for these very interesting comments that we've heard since the beginning. Let me jump right into the issue. When you talk about security, when you talk about trade, there's no doubt that states remain at the center of the game. There's no reason when you talk, let's say, about nuclear non-proliferation to involve NGOs, philanthropic foundations, companies, etc. However, for the rest of the international issues, for most of them, actually, whether you talk about health and COVID-19, whether you talk about biodiversity, climate, but also cybersecurity or the digital world in general, there's no reason to exclude all of these other actors. And on the contrary, there's nothing you can actually do by only government fiat, that is to say, by the pure multilateral game only. And so the Paris Peace Forum was founded 2 years ago on this premise, the idea that, you can call it vertical multilateralism, that is to say, integrating other actors than states. You can call it, as Pascal Lamy, the president of the Paris Peace Forum, calls it polylateralism, or any word of jargon that you can find. But the idea remains. It is that for certain issues, for certain international issues, we need to include other actors than states. The world is not only Westphalian, even though it is. And given the rapid state of disintegration of multilateralism, I would go as far as that assessment. Multilateralism has been degrading for the past 10, 20 years, but this has been accelerating in the recent month because of great power tensions, because of populist leaders turning their back on multilateralism, etc. We need to defend multilateralism, but also to rebuild it. And rebuilding it also means expanding it to other actors. Let me give you a very concrete example. We all know that our common future depends on finding a vaccine and distributing a vaccine, not just finding it for the richest country and the middle classes of the US, Europe, and China for that matter. And so how will we do that? Of course, states have an important role to play, but the WHO has an important role to play. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has an important role to play. The Wellcome Trust has an important role to play. CEPI, Gavi, UNITAID, the World Fund for AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis all have an important role to play. And all of these actors together can make a difference. State by themselves will not, especially in these days when we have so much competition and so much introversion, I would say, on this. But the fact remains that there's only one cyber world, there's only one health, there's only one climate, and only one planet. And so what we need to do is foster the meeting and coordination of all of these different actors, and that's really why the Paris Peace Forum was founded with a Westphalian basis, a Westphalian core. States remain at the center of the game, but associating all of the others in order to make a difference. Let me give you another example, something that strikes all of us, including health facilities, including the WHO and others, cyber attacks or cybersecurity in general. What the Paris Peace Forum has done is to work in complement of the UN, which is and remains the legitimate body which we should all strengthen. Starting in 2006, there was a GEG, a group of governmental experts working on cybersecurity. It reached certain results, like the applicability of international law to the cyber world. That was in 2014. But starting in 2016, 2017, it really basically collapsed and didn't give any results. But that's also when we saw many more cyber attacks, NotPetya, WannaCry, and all of the other viruses that you have heard about, and that are striking not only companies, but also states, but also hospitals. Remember the NHS in the UK, civilian systems, etc. And so a certain number of actors banded together, from Siemens and Microsoft to governments and civil society group, and insisted on doing something. And that something was launched at the first Paris Peace Forum, the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace, which now gathers more than 1,000 signatories, almost 80 governments, 600 companies from around the world, including Huawei, for example, or Kaspersky from Russia and others, and agreeing on a number of principles and putting some norms into this sector, which really is not very well regulated or very well governed. And what happened was, by bringing this, it sort of helped re-energize what we saw at the UN, that is the resurrection of the group of governmental experts and the open-ended group on cybersecurity, the open-ended working group on cybersecurity, which now are starting to make progress towards some kind of governance and regulation of cybersecurity. So I went into this example a bit in detail to show that multi-actor initiatives like the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace, or you could mention ACT-A, the access to COVID-19 tools, the initiative that was taken by the EU, France, a number of governments, but also the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, CEPI, Gavi, and others. These multi-actor initiatives are often effective at answering our challenges, and I would add, at rejuvenating multilateralism. One last word on the third edition of the forum, which I should add as a great lineup of northern and southern members in the executive committee, as well as in the steering committee where, Henry, you sit for the Center for China and Globalization. The third edition will be once again in November in Paris. It will, because of the General Assembly, G7 and COP26 have been pretty much either cancelled or downsized, and the G20 we hope will give results, but we don't know yet. Will be the first real international meeting in person after, we hope, the bulk of COVID-19 has passed. And so there's a special responsibility which we will have with the heads of state, with the CEOs, the heads of large NGOs, international organizations. We will focus on the solutions to the crisis. First, global governance of health. We know there are reforms to be made. We'll have Dr. Tedros present. We'll have Bill Gates. We'll have all the major players present on that issue. Second is the issue of development. And we talked about the financing of development a bit earlier. What we're doing this year at the Paris Peace Forum is have the first ever Summit of Development Banks, which will happen on November 12th. It's called Finance in Common, and it will gather the 450 public development banks around the world. There are as many as 450. Most of them are completely unknown. They are local, regional, sub-regional banks. They're not as well known as the big multilateral banks like the World Bank and others, but together they represent 10% of annual investment in the world. And I think in 2020, it will actually be more than 10%. And we will gather them in order to strengthen the response to COVID-19 in terms of counter-cyclical action, and more importantly, to try to get them to commit to aligning their investment with the SDGs, with Agenda 2030 on the one hand, and with climate goals on the other hand. If these 10% of investment respect the objectives and the guidelines of the SDGs and climate, then we'll all be better off, especially because they have a big impact on private investment as well. And then the third and last issue that we will tackle is the digital world, with this issue of cybersecurity I just mentioned, but also with the issue of rights, the issue of private data. Contact tracing is a great answer to COVID-19, but how much do we want to give our private data to these systems? Robin Lee, for example, the CEO of Baidu, has asked the question recently, and he's right, I think. And so we'll work on this issue. And lastly, also work on infodemics. What is called infodemics? It's an old problem we know about the platforms on the internet, that is fake news, manipulation, etc. But during the pandemic, we've seen a proliferation of fake news and false information on COVID-19, which have sometimes been pretty harmful to a lot of people. And so we should take another look at how we best regulate these sphere of information without infringing free speech. So, bottom line, I give you all sort of an invitation to come and join us in November in Paris from November 11 to 13 for the third edition of the forum. It will be a hybrid edition. It will be both in presence, in physical presence, and online, because we know that's a very special year. But we'll maintain the physical presence with heads of states and others, and we hope to be helpful, as I try to explain, to the multilateral system in general, to defending it and rejuvenating it, to try to get a slightly better governance for our children. Thank you.